Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Export to Japan podcast. And on this week's episode, I'm so excited and happy to be welcoming a very special guest. It's a gentleman that I've had the chance to speak to a few times now. And as I'm getting to know him, I'm realizing what a wonderful, charming man he is. But not only that, he's also part of an amazing company. He's always very humble. He's smiling already. He's always so humble. But this is an incredible company that have built in their own particular niche that they work in. They've built a brand that has just become so well known, not only in the UK and Japan, but actually all over the world. And we're very lucky that Jim is obviously a busy man, but he spared some time today to join us on the podcast and tell us a little bit more about some of his experiences in Japan. So I'm delighted to welcome Jim Walker, who is the Joint Managing Director of Walker Shortbread Limited. And he is also the grandson of the founder, I believe. So Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Steve, and hello from the Highlands of Scotland.
It's lovely to have you here. So Jim, I've got lots of questions and lots of bits and pieces I'd like to cover with you as we learn more about your company and your journey into Japan. But I'd like to just kick off really with a very general question, just for you to tell us a little bit more about the background and the history of Walker's Shortbread Limited, if you could, please.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Well, our company is Walker Shortbread Limited. It's a small family business based in Aberlour in Scotland, north of Scotland. It was founded by my grandfather in 1898, and it was run by him and his two sons until around 1960. They had the difficult job of navigating the company through two world wars and deserve most of the credit for what the company is today. My generation joined the company in the early 60s when it was still a village bakery employing about 16 people. We lived next to the shop, and we made a wide variety of bakery products, including shortbreads and various other lines. But the shortbread was gradually becoming known as the best in Scotland. Our generation started to develop a market in the UK for our shortbread first, and by the mid-70s, we'd started to look at opportunities in the export market. We continued to develop since then, and now we're in many countries around the world, but the Japanese market is still very close to our hearts.
I'm sure it is, Jim, and I know I know Japan is one of the markets that certainly you've been very successful in, and as well as others all around the world. But that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you, and what a great history to your company. So sort of bringing that on then and starting to focus a little bit more on the Japanese market. Can you remember back what the initial trigger point was for your company to really start being proactive or looking at the Japanese market or taking action in the Japanese market? What was that trigger point?
Well, we started to believe there was an opportunity for us outside the UK about 1975, and we were convinced that the product would sell around the world, and we took a stand at a trade fair in 1977, and there at that very first trade fair we met a Japanese distribution company called Nishoku. We met them there, and we got on well with them, and that's how we started in Japan.
Okay, amazing. Was that trade fair here in the UK, Jim, or?
That was in Germany, in Cologne.
In Germany, okay. So you went to a trade fair in Germany, and that was around the time when you were developing your export strategy and thinking of ways to export and break into new markets. And that Japanese distributor found you or you met each other at that trade show, and that was how that relationship first started to develop. Okay. Now, if we sort of focus in on that first discussion when you started sort of building a relationship with that partner in Japan, because that's obviously something that many foreign companies are looking at, finding the right partner and how they work with the right partner. If I can take you back to that time, what was it about that particular partner that sort of gave you the confidence or made you feel that they could be a good fit?
They were very, very nice people. They were charming. We liked their style. They had a good reputation of being a importer of the finest products in Japan. They were a family company, and I think that was probably the most important thing. I think we always tend to get on very well with family companies because there's more of a sense of continuity and longevity. And This company had been founded by Mr. Nakamura just after the war. He believed that more foreign foods would be of interest to Japan in the coming years, so he set up a very small distribution company. And he had three sons, but two of them joined the company. The one I met originally was Mr. Kozo Nakamura, but both of his sons in the company had been educated overseas. They both went to university in the States, and their English was well nigh perfect. They were charming people, and they had some very good brands. And although they were the first people we met, we felt very confident that we could have a long-term relationship with them. And so we started in 1977, 78 rather, and the relationship grew from there. And so we're with them for almost 40 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay. Now, so around that time then, as you were starting to get to know that company and that was starting to get you proactively doing things in Japan, what was your feelings that you started to sort of gather as you got to know the Japanese people, your partners, customers, etc.? What kind of observations did you make, and what characteristics did you observe from those days of starting to do business in Japan?
The Japanese people. Well, initially, the strike you as being very detailed, articulate, very definite what they want, and very serious about business. I think that was the first thing that struck me more than anything. When we first met Kozo Nakamura, he explained that shortbread was really unknown in Japan, and that he said it would take time because no one knows what shortbread is. So he explained that it would take time, and it did take time, but they were really a pleasure to work with throughout, and sales grew steadily with them. But on Japan itself, I've always enjoyed working in Japan, and they are it's a lovely country, and it's full of really charming people, and we always get on very well with them, and I think it's a very good basis for a business relationship. Japan's got a very dense population, and I think that has shaped their personality. Being used to living in very large conurbations with so many people in small places, they are very, very polite. They're very formal, very, very mannerly, and etiquette is very important to them. And doing the right thing, both in business and outside business, is very important to them. They're full of traditions. They've got very high expectations. They like perfection, but they're very wealthy and they can afford to pay for it. So that also enhanced our confidence in investing in the market long term.
Got it. Yeah.
In general, the more sophisticated version of very many other wealthy markets. Also, you do find lots of anomalies when you visit. They're a very friendly nation, and we get on very well with them. So yeah, it's always a pleasure working with them.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely echo exactly what you're saying from my, I don't quite have the depth of experience you've got, but certainly the last 20 years of last 20 years of doing business in Japan, I've certainly recognized all those characteristics as well. I mean, one little question I'll put to you there, though. On the flip side, I know some of the companies that I work with and with companies I'm involved in myself, sometimes they say that they find it a little bit frustrating trying to do business in Japan. And if I put that to you, what would you say?
Well, I would challenge it.
Okay.
I don't think they're frustrating.
Okay.
It can also be very frustrating to do business, as you probably know very well.
A good answer.
And Scottish companies too can be equally frustrating. So I think it's just that they're slightly different.
And yes.
They're a little bit different, and but they're very serious. They're very honourable, and it's just a case of getting to know them, and there's a different style in many ways. For instance, you may have a long discussion with them, and they may all nod their heads and say, yes, that's correct, yeah, that's correct. But that doesn't mean to say that they're agreeing with you. They're being very polite to explain that they understand what you're trying to tell them.
Yeah.
They'll then go away and discuss it with their colleagues and come back with a response.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Later, and they think things through before they give a proper answer. So yes means that you're on the way, but it doesn't mean you're there. And
Understood.
the other thing is in decision making, it's slightly different from the UK. Japanese companies tend to make very slow decisions, are very slow in making a decision, but it's often said that a Japanese company will often take a year to make a decision, but they'll execute it in a week. British companies often take a week to make a decision, but a year to execute it.
Yeah.
So, and it's getting to know that, and not looking for immediate instant answers. They'll never give you a straight instant answer. It's just the way they do business, it's refreshing. You get that truer answer when you get the answer.
Yeah.
So there's lots of little things like that. You just learn to understand that they want all the detail, and they go into much more detail than meeting another customer, shall we say.
Yeah, they're great observations, Jim, and you're spot on, and thank you for sharing them. It's really interesting and fascinating to hear those. I mean, I'd like to move the conversation on from talking about the sort of Japanese people and the characteristics there, actually to sort of pick your brains a little bit in terms of the kind of products that could be right for Japan, because you can imagine with the work we do at Export to Japan and the work that the UK government is doing, where there are many UK companies with all sorts of amazing products that are now looking at markets like Japan. But of course, it doesn't automatically mean because it's a big market in Japan that your products automatically are going to sell there. So what would you say from your sort of experience? Are there any tips or thoughts you could share about what kind of international products might be more likely to succeed in Japan and why?
I think the food and food culture is very different from British food culture. But it's obvious there's a synergy as you see sushi and various Japanese foods becoming more popular here. So, but I think first of all, it's high quality. Everything has got to be, the best, and they can afford to pay for it. I think in food, one of the biggest exports of Japan is fish, and fish has been very successful. I can't help thinking that if there's going to be problems getting fish into Europe, that it may be an opportunity for some high quality seafood like scallops or langoustine and smoked salmon, fresh salmon. They love fish, and they really love salmon. So I'm sure that there must be more opportunities there. They very high quality meat. So they do have high quality meat themselves, but they do like very high quality beef. And it could easily be that some parts of animals that aren't used in the UK, they may use in Japan. There may be, or certain animal parts that one can't sell very easily in the UK might be in high demand in Japan. So there may be opportunities in that sort of area. But generally, food, high quality food, all sorts of foods, but really high quality is most important. They must be very well packaged, and also in Japan there's a lot of humidity, so wrapping needs to be very good, shelf life needs to be good, and I think there's lots of food, but other products as well. I'm sure would be of interest to Japanese. They love cashmeres. They like lots of Scottish products, but obviously English products as well. Wedgwood type products and whatnot. I'm sure they love British traditions. So I think there must be opportunities there.
Very good. Very good. I mean, you've just triggered a little thought in my mind there as a little sort of sub question to a point you just made about packaging and the way you present your product. Over the years, as you've continued to sort of develop your business in Japan and you've grown your business in Japan, have you had to change your packaging in any way at all, specifically for the Japanese market, or is it just the same as anywhere else?
As we've developed, we've had to make one or two different sizes or different products for Japan. We haven't changed recipes, but different packaging formats we've had to produce because it's more appropriate to the way they eat and use products. They like individually wrapped products, and um, and often smaller portions than what this may be eaten in this country.
Oh, okay, very interesting. Yeah. And did you learn those kind of things through listening to your partner's voice and the customer's voice? And how did you sort of make those
Yes,
decisions?
I think a good distributor was always very quick to help to advise the company what they should be doing to make their products more suitable for the Japanese consumer.
Yeah, great, great. Okay. And then linked to that point, Jim, what would you say about with your organization back here up in Scotland, your factory and your production process and your management team and things? What advice would you give? Do you think UK companies have to think about anything in their processes or the way they're working if they want to be successful with the Japanese market? Any observations on that from you?
Well, I think just being very detailed and being very strict on the quality control. Standards that might be acceptable in this country may not be acceptable in Japan.
Right.
But so it can be inconvenience very often for the factory or factories. But on the other hand, it probably helps to lift the standard of all your production, because if it lifts your standards, that's going to be good for selling in other countries as well.
Right. Yeah, makes perfect sense. I completely understand that. Okay, how about visiting the market and building personal relationships? Again, a lot of people say that it is a market that needs a lot of work with building personal relationships, and that kind of thing is very important. What's your experience on that, Jim?
Yes, I would fully endorse that, Steve. Getting to know your customer is very important, and getting a good relationship as well. It's very important to visit. They respect and love personal contact, and they always would like personal contact at the highest level. And that, so the whole company is committed to your product and your brand. So yes, they expect visits, and visits are worthwhile, because only by seeing it only by seeing the country can you really evaluate opportunities and realize what opportunities there are for your type of product. So visits are absolutely essential. And if somebody, the most senior person in the company, can go once in a while, that helps as well.
Yeah, understood.
They undoubtedly would come and any good Japanese importer would be in the UK every year probably, and would often try to visit the supplier as well.
Yeah, right. Got you. Now, I know at the moment in the current situation, obviously none of us can particularly travel anywhere, but obviously that looks like it's coming to an end now, hopefully shortly. But back in the day when you were in the thrust of really building your Japan business and building it up, how frequently would you say you were going over? Was it once a year, a couple of times a year?
Yeah, about once a year. Once a year.
Okay.
But they would come over to trade fairs, so we'd probably end up seeing them probably two or three times a year. We'd have a meeting with them. Yeah.
Got you.
Okay. Once a year. Yeah.
Got you. Now, I now want to come back to talk about distributors, because that's obviously another very important part of the process for international companies looking to go into the market. And you told us a little earlier about how you found your initial distributor and what was important about that distributor and how you built the relationship. How did that journey continue? Are you still with the same distributor, or did you make any changes at any point in that process?
We would have been with the same distributor, but sadly in 2016, almost 5 years ago, this month, our distributor went bankrupt. It was a big shock, huge surprise, and it wasn't the fault of the directors I dealt with. There was other people involved in the company, and they had a branch that handled property, and they got into debt, and it came as a total surprise when the holding company collapsed, and bringing the food distribution company down with it. And it was a huge shock. The person I dealt with was absolutely honest, and I would still trust them, the person I dealt with. And it says something about their culture that we had absolutely no indication beforehand that they were in difficulties. They never were one day late in paying one bill. And it came as a total shock when we heard that they'd gone bankrupt. And so I don't think it's very common in Japan. It's very unusual because this was a family company we dealt with for 40 years. But there we had it. But we were very, very fortunate in being able to transfer distribution to another company who was a customer of theirs. So it's another company who sort of knew the products, and it's actually Mitsubishi Foods, and they took on the brand, and they've recovered all the lost sales and grown it further in the last 4 years.
Wow.
So we were very fortunate, but it could have been disastrous. But we're fortunate.
And so with making the decision to move across to the new distributor, it wasn't a case of you necessarily had to go out and sort of search for one and select one. That kind of came in through the existing relationships, did it? And you obviously evaluated that and decided that was the right decision.
When the Shoku's bankruptcy was announced, we had several companies contacted us, but Mitsubishi knew original importer very well, and they sent 2 people over within about 3 days to come and see us and to see if they could take on the agency, and they were very, very good, and they made it a relatively painless changeover for us. Yeah, so we're fortunate that we managed to recover the business pretty quickly. Yeah.
That's great. Very good. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I now want to move on to pick your brains a little bit on trademarks. Because I guess that's a very important topic for you all over the world, not just in Japan. But what are your views on that? Any views you have to share about the importance of trademarks, and any experience you can share with us regarding Japan in that respect?
Well, yes, I do have some experience of that, because there was a habit a long time ago for some Japanese companies to acquire overseas brands, in as much as seeing a name in their market or somewhere else, checking whether or not it's been registered, and if it's not registered, they could register it. And we actually had that when we started. So about 10 years after we started, somebody wrote to us who had registered their product in Japan, and explained that they owned their brand in Japan. But fortunately, the company who registered it hadn't made proper use of it, and we were able to claim it back at no cost, because they had failed to make proper use of it. They hadn't used it widely enough. It's a habit of some companies to do this, and it's a good idea to register your brand properly before you start in the Japanese market. Yeah,
great advice. Yeah, very good. And good news that at least it wasn't a painful process for you when you found out that someone else had got it registered. That's good. But yeah, wise words. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, what about next topic I want to go on to is to get your thoughts on, sort of general thoughts on the retail market in Japan. Now you've kind of got to know a little bit more about that and how that compares to the UK, and are there any sort of notable differences that it's worth other international companies knowing about when they're looking at the Japanese market?
Yeah, there are lots of differences, Steve. It's really quite surprising how different the market is, and that's why it's important. Somebody that's taking it seriously should take the time to visit. It's fascinating and interesting that many of the differences are good news for UK companies. The retail scene is very dynamic and quite different from the UK and many other markets. The system is very complicated, in as much as nearly always there's an importer for the product, and then there's often a sub-distributor, and then it's sold to the retailer. So there are 2 or 3 levels of distribution, and that tends to make the whole thing more complicated, and prices to be higher, because there's different margins to be paid before the product reaches the consumer. There have been moves to try to streamline this over the years, but still, for a niche specialty product, the traditional route is still to use an importer distributor. Some supermarkets may be able to import direct, but normally they would only import major brands or large products, commodities and whatnot. But niche specialty foods still need managed by a good importer. Interestingly, the the market's very fragmented, and there's a wide variety of players, and it's very broken up, shall we say. In the UK, as you know, top four retailers hold approximately 70% of the UK grocery market. In Japan, however, the top 16 retailers will only have 35% of the market.
Wow.
So can you imagine how fragmented it is, and therefore how many opportunities it can create for specialized products? Someone could develop a very good business focusing only on one market sector. The largest group, Aeon, they're the largest conglomerate, and they have about 9% of the grocery market.
Gosh.
Whereas in this country, the number one player is 40%. So
That's
it's very
amazing.
different, and it's a much better balance in brands to retailers. It's still a branded market fundamentally, and private label is still quite underdeveloped in comparison to the UK. So it is really a branded market, and the Japanese love brands, love high quality brands, and they're very loyal to brands. When they find a product that they enjoy, they tend to stay loyal to it. So it's refreshing in many ways. There's also a very large convenience store market. There's how many? It must be 7,000 or more 7-Elevens in Japan, as well as 3 or 4 other chains of convenience stores. There's Family Mart, Lawson. And some of these companies have their subdivisions. There's Lawson Gold, which is their prestige convenience stores, but it is a world of convenience stores, and it's often you can see 2 7-Elevens within 200 yards of each other.
Amazing.
So it's interesting. But for specialty foods, in selling Japan, it's still traditional probably the most likely route is to find a good distributor to give it the care and attention and the passion that high quality specialized foods need.
Got it. Yeah, very clear. Thank you. And I guess that difference that you've illuminated, very clearly there about the different structure and sort of scope of the way the retailers work and the power that they've got and the fragmentation. I suppose there's pros and cons either way to that. Is there? If you look at the way it typically works here in the UK, with a very small number having a very high monopoly on the market compared to it being very fragmented in Japan, I suppose there's just pros and cons both ways.
Yes, indeed. And I think the Japanese market is much more disciplined in terms of pricing. I don't know, it's probably a difference in the law, but the price variations in Japan is much less than you would find in this country. In some countries, you may find a product selling at £1 in one store and another store at £3 or £4, whereas in Japan it's much more regimented.
Interesting.
And they all need to make a sensible margin, and so it is more controlled in many ways. But I think it does open up more opportunities for smaller manufacturers, because you're not dependent on 1 or 2 big stores. The smaller stores are different levels of stores, and lots of small specialty stores too. Like there are not quite so many of them in the UK now, but in Japan there's still quite a few specialty food stores.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting, and there are lots of opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Okay, Jim, we're coming towards the end of the discussion now, but there's still a couple more questions I'd just like to pick your brains on before we let you go. You've given us a really good illustration of how long you've been going at the Japanese market now, and a lot of the observations about different stages of your journey, including the first distributor you worked with and then the second one, etc. What would you say? A lot of people kind of comment and say Japan is a market you have to have a very long-term strategy and be very patient and be in there for the long haul and things. How does that fit with what you've found? How has your growth developed over the years, and over what sort of time periods? What are your observations on that, please?
I would fully agree with that comment. It is a market that you need to be prepared to take seriously and be patient, and stay in there for the long term. And it takes time, but for us, because the Japanese people didn't know our product when we started, and it's still not widely known. But we found that for the first really 10 years, our sales were very, very small. We only sold a container a year. But then after that, once the distributor kept trying very hard, he graduated into 1 or 2 extra stores, and it started to grow. And now it's grown steadily over the last 30 years. And we're probably shipping more like a container a day rather than a container a year. But it's in small steps. It takes time.
Of course. And a lot of hard work.
and painstaking effort. I mean, everybody's got to be prepared for ups and downs along the road, and a lot of effort on the part of everyone in a company, not just it's in the factory floor that the work really happens. And it's not the salesman. The salesman is important, but it's in the factory floor where the job's done, and that's what's the difference between success or failure. And I think having a presence in Japan probably disrupts a factory in many ways, but that's part of the price you pay.
Yeah,
you often have to change products and whatnot. But you certainly need to be patient and in it for the long term, and be sure that the board is behind a long-term strategy.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's such a wonderful little snippet you've shared with us there, because that to me is one of the challenges that we come across with a lot of UK companies that are looking at the Japanese market, is really developing that understanding of needing that long-term strategy. But such a good example from you of sticking in there and sticking at it and doing the right things and learning and being patient and persevering. And then you got to that point where the growth started to come, the payback came from it. And that's a perfect example to share with us. So thank you for that. Really good.
The best lesson I got from that was at a trade fair as well. I met a gentleman who was the buying director of a large German department store, and he came and gone to our stand and tasted their product and loved it. He said, "Yeah, it's a beautiful product, Mr. Walkie, but beautiful product." He said, "Great, really good. If you're still in the German market in 10 years' time, come back and see me." 10 years. And he said, yes, he said, "I'm so fed up with British companies who say they're going to tackle the German market. They come here and list their products, and then 18 months later, they pull out because it hadn't been successful. And I'm left with egg in my face and I can't get further supplies. So I would always wait for 10 years.
That's a perfect example. That's a really good example to share with us. And I understand.
We actually got in about 4 or 5 years later.
Okay, good. Well done. Very good.
Patience.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now, looking ahead, Jim, you've shared the journey with us, and so many wonderful golden nuggets that you've shared there. So valuable to get your insights, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will really appreciate that. But how about the future? What do you think the outlook holds for you? What does the future hold? What's your company strategy for Japan looking ahead? What do you think?
We're very fortunate that our product is somewhat iconic, and we don't need to change the product. We just gradually improve and develop as time goes on and improve our packaging. And we're pleased with our relationship with our distributor in Japan, and we should be able to continue growing that. And there are ways to grow further as the market develops, hopefully. And I'm very pleased myself that my younger son, Alistair, who has been with us for 7 years, is going to take on the Japanese market from me. In fact, he's taken it now. In the last 2 years, he's been doing it now. And he's doing a great job, and he's helping sales. He's done more than I could do. And he's doing very well, and he's very good in relationships. Mm-hmm. So,
very good.
He's developed a love for sake as well. But
yeah, good. Good for him.
But he's done very well, and I'm sure he'll enjoy looking after the market that I have for many years.
I'm sure he will, and I've no doubt he'll do an amazing job following on from the great work you've done. So that's wonderful. Well, listen, Jim, that's been a really, really good discussion. Thank you so much. You've very kindly shared so many golden nuggets of information with us, and you've covered all the topics that I wanted to cover, and we've learned so much from you. And everything from talking about that long-term vision that we just touched on and having that strategy, right through to some great insights in the distribution network and how to go about selecting your distributor and getting that relationship right, the need to visit the market and build those relationships and gain that local knowledge and be prepared to make modifications not only in your product and your packaging, but also in your processes to support the market. That came out very clearly as well. So yes, so many just wonderful golden nuggets there, Jim, and very, very valuable for this sort of next generation of companies that are coming through, that are back at that start point that you were at when you looked at the Japanese market, that they can learn from your wisdoms and your experience. So thank you so much for sharing it, Jim. It's been a pleasure as always speaking to you, and I really appreciate your time today, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you.
Thank you.